The day my sister stood up in front of our entire family and called me a thief, I didn't say a single word. I just sat there at the end of the dining table, the same table where I'd done my homework every night for 12 years, where Mom used to make Sunday pot roast, where Dad once told me I was the one who really had the head for numbers in this family. And I let her talk. My sister, Fiona, is 3 years older than me. She has our mother's cheekbones and our father's confidence, and she has always believed that anything good that happened to me was something that had been taken from her. I'm Leah. I'm 31 years old. I have a finance degree from UT Austin, a CPA license, and until 8 months ago, I was the CFO of Caldwell & Horn Logistics, a regional freight company that my grandfather built from 2 trucks and a prayer back in 1974. We have contracts with 4 major retail chains. We employ over 200 people across Texas and Oklahoma. Last fiscal year, we cleared $18.4 million in net revenue. My grandfather left controlling interest to my father. My father, when his health started declining 3 years ago, brought me in to run the finances. Not Fiona, me. That decision lit a fuse that I didn't know was burning until it exploded in my face. The accusation started with an email. It was a Tuesday morning in March, and I was at my desk reviewing Q1 projections when my phone rang. It was our company attorney, a cautious man named Harold, who had been with Caldwell & Horn since before I was born. "Leah," he said, and his voice had that careful flatness that lawyers get when they're about to deliver something bad. "I need you to come down to my office this afternoon. Your sister has retained outside counsel." I remember setting down my coffee very slowly. For what? She's alleging financial misconduct. Specifically, she's claiming you authorized a series of wire transfers, totaling approximately $340,000 from the company's operating account into a personal account in your name. The number hit me like cold water, $340,000. I knew exactly what was in every account this company held. I reconciled those statements myself every single month, and I had never, not once, moved a single unauthorized dollar. "That didn't happen," I said. "I know," Harold said. "But she has documentation, Leah. Someone put together a paper trail." I should back up and tell you about Kevin. Kevin Marsh had been our operations coordinator for 4 years. He was sharp, organized, well-liked, and, I now understand, deeply loyal to my sister in ways I never thought to question. Fiona had recommended him for the position. I had hired him based on his resume and 2 glowing references. He sat 12 feet from my office door. For 4 years, Kevin had access to our financial systems, vendor accounts, payment portals, authorization logs. He knew our processes better than almost anyone, and somewhere along the way, he and Fiona had decided that the best way to remove me from the company was to make it look like I'd been stealing from it. I didn't know any of this yet. I just knew that on a Tuesday in March, my world had quietly started collapsing, and I hadn't felt it yet. The family meeting happened that weekend. Dad was home. He'd been in and out of the hospital that winter with his heart, and he was tired in a way I hadn't seen before. Fiona had organized everything. She sat at the head of the table with a leather portfolio in front of her and her husband Doug beside her. Doug is an attorney, which I had always thought was a coincidence until that afternoon. My aunt and uncle were there, my cousin, even my grandmother. Dad's mother, in her 80s, sharp as ever, sat in the corner with her hands folded, watching. Fiona laid out the evidence: printed bank statements, wire transfer confirmations, an internal memo that allegedly bore my signature authorizing a payment to a vendor that didn't exist. She spoke calmly and carefully, the way people do when they've rehearsed. "I've been watching this for 6 months," she said. I didn't want to believe it. She's my sister. But the numbers don't lie, and I have a responsibility to this family and this company. My uncle shook his head. My aunt looked at me with that particular expression, half pity, half satisfaction. That told me she had already decided. Dad said nothing. He was looking at the papers Fiona had slid in front of him, and his face was unreadable. I said, "None of that is real." Fiona looked at me. "Then explain it." "I don't have to explain fabricated documents at a dinner table. I'll explain them in front of an auditor or a judge." Doug cleared his throat. "We'd prefer to keep this inside the family." I'm sure you would, I said. I pushed back from the table, picked up my bag, and walked out. My grandmother's eyes followed me the whole way to the door. Here is what I want you to understand about the weeks that followed. I was scared. I know the way these stories are supposed to go. The wrongly accused person is steady and unshakable, always 2 steps ahead, never rattled. That wasn't me. I spent 3 days barely sleeping, going through every financial record I could access, trying to understand what had been built against me and how. I called Harold every morning. I retained my own attorney, a woman named Patricia who specialized in corporate fraud and who, in our first meeting, looked at the documents Fiona had presented and said, "This is sophisticated. Someone knew your systems." That was the moment I understood this wasn't just Fiona being jealous. This was planned. Patricia filed an emergency motion to preserve all company financial records. We requested a full forensic audit. And while the legal machinery started grinding, I went back through 4 years of memory trying to figure out who, besides Fiona, had enough access and enough motive to construct a fake paper trail this detailed. It took me 11 days to land on Kevin. The thing that gave him away wasn't the transfers themselves. It was the timestamps. The internal memo, the one with my alleged signature, was created in a document management system that logs every access event. Every time a file is opened, edited, saved, or printed, the system records the user, the device, and the timestamp down to the second. My attorney requested those logs as part of the forensic audit. The memo in question had been created on a Thursday afternoon at 2047 p.m. According to my calendar, my badge swipes, and the security footage from our building, I was in a client meeting in downtown Fort Worth at that exact moment. I didn't return to the office until after 5. The document had been created from a workstation in the operations department, Kevin's workstation. But here's the thing about Kevin, he had been careful. The file showed he had logged in using his own credentials, then accessed a shared administrative folder, then, and this is where he made his mistake, he had apparently forgotten that our document system also logs clipboard activity when certain security flags are enabled. He had copied my digital signature from a PDF of a previous authorization memo. The clipboard log showed the exact file he had pulled it from, the exact time, and his username. He didn't forge my signature. He copied and pasted it, and the system remembered. Patricia presented the findings to the forensic auditor in mid-April. The auditor, an independent firm out of Dallas, issued a preliminary report within 2 weeks. The wire transfers had been initiated from Kevin's access credentials during hours when I was verifiably elsewhere. The vendor account the money had gone to was opened 3 months before the transfers, tied to an LLC registered in Delaware to a name I didn't recognize. Delaware LLCs don't require officer disclosure, but the registered agent had made one small administrative error. The billing email for the LLC's registered agent service was connected to an account that Doug, my brother-in-law, had used for a different business filing 2 years prior. Same email address, different context. But once the forensic team found it, everything connected. Patricia called me on a Thursday evening. I was sitting in my car in the parking garage of my apartment building because I hadn't been able to make myself go inside. "We have them," she said. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt something closer to grief. Because Fiona wasn't just my adversary, she was my sister. She had been at my college graduation. She had helped me move into my first apartment. She had called me move into my first serious relationship ended and talked to me until 2 a.m. Whatever had curdled inside her, whether it was jealousy or resentment or just a slow-building belief that the company should have been hers, it had brought us to a forensic auditor's report in a Dallas law office, and I didn't know how to feel about that. I told Patricia to proceed. The hearing was on a Monday in May. It wasn't a criminal trial, not yet. It was a civil proceeding brought by Fiona and Doug to remove me from my position at Caldwell and Horn and recover the allegedly misappropriated funds. They had filed in Tarrant County. The courtroom was small and fluorescent lit and smelled like old carpet, and the specific anxiety of people who had gotten there early because they were nervous. My father was there. He had driven himself, which told me how important this was to him. His cardiologist had told him to stop driving 6 months ago. He sat in the gallery, not on either side, just in the middle, and he looked smaller than I'd ever seen him. Fiona sat at the plaintiff's table with Dud beside her and their retained attorney, a man named Whitfield who wore a very expensive suit and had the practiced ease of someone accustomed to winning. I sat at the respondent's table with Patricia, who had a notepad and a pen and the unshakable calm of someone who had spent 30 years in rooms like this. Whitfield opened by laying out the case methodically. The transfers, the vendor account, the internal memo. He spoke for nearly 20 minutes, and he was good, precise, measured, building the picture of a CFO who had used her access and her authority to quietly siphon money from a family business. I watched the judge. Her name was the Honorable Sandra Reeves, and she had been on the Tarrant County bench for 11 years. She didn't write anything while Whitfield spoke. She just listened, her hands folded on the bench, her expression professionally neutral. When Whitfield finished, Judge Reeves looked down at the documents in front of her. She paged through them slowly. Then she looked up. Not at Whitfield, not at me. At the forensic audit addendum that Patricia had submitted as a respondent's exhibit. Mr. Whitfield, she said, the internal authorization memo your client submitted as Exhibit C? This was produced from your client's forensic review of the company's document management system? Whitfield said yes. And it bears the respondent's digital signature, which your client alleges was applied by the respondent on the date listed. Yes, Whitfield said again, with the confident ease of a man who believes the next question will help him. Judge Reeves looked at him over the top of her reading glasses. Can you explain to me, she said, how the respondent signed a document at 2047 p.m. on a Thursday when the building's own security system places her in an elevator in downtown Fort Worth at 2044? The courtroom was very quiet. Whitfield said, Your Honor, the respondent's exhibit includes badge access logs, building security footage timestamps, and a client meeting confirmation with a third-party signatory, Judge Reeves said. Her voice hadn't changed at all. It was still measured, still professional. The document management system logs show creation from a workstation in the operations department during that same window. Your client's forensic review appears to have been incomplete. Whitfield turned to Fiona. It was a small movement, just a degree or two, but I saw it, and whatever he saw in her face told him something. He asked for a recess. Judge Reeves gave him 15 minutes. I went into the hallway with Patricia. My hands were completely steady, which surprised me. I had expected them to shake. She saw it immediately, Patricia said quietly. She read the whole exhibit file. Judges on commercial cases usually do. Patricia looked at me. Whitfield didn't know about the clipboard logs. Fiona and Kevin didn't tell him everything. I leaned against the wall and looked at the drop ceiling and thought about the fact that the whole thing had come apart because Kevin had copy-pasted my signature instead of learning to forge it manually. 4 years of planning, and the whole structure had a clipboard log at its center. My father found me in the hallway during the recess. He walked slowly, and he looked like he hadn't slept well in weeks, and when he stopped in front of me, he didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he said I should have looked at those documents myself, before the family meeting. It wasn't an apology exactly. My father is not a man who apologizes easily. But it was something. You were sick, I said. That's not an excuse. I didn't know what to say to that. So I said nothing. We stood there in the hallway until the bailiff called us back. When court resumed, Whitfield requested a continuance to review the respondent's exhibits more thoroughly. Judge Reeves denied it. She ruled from the bench that afternoon. The forensic evidence established that the disputed wire transfers had not been initiated by the respondent. The authorization memo was created during a period when the respondent was verifiably off-site. The LLC associated with the recipient vendor account had a documented administrative connection to the plaintiff's co-petitioner. The petition to remove the respondent from her position was denied. The claim for recovery of funds was dismissed. She also referred the matter to the Tarrant County District Attorney's Office for review of potential fraud charges. When Judge Reeves finished reading her ruling, the courtroom was so quiet I could hear the ventilation system. I looked at Fiona. She was staring at the table in front of her. Doug had a hand over his mouth. Whitfield was writing something on his notepad very quickly, which is what lawyers do when they want to look busy while they process bad news. My grandmother, who had come to the hearing and sat in the back of the gallery the whole time and whom I hadn't known was there until that moment, caught my eye from across the room. She gave me one small, definitive nod. I nodded back. The DA's office opened an investigation in June. By August, Kevin had accepted a plea deal, wire fraud and computer fraud charges, 18 months plus restitution. Part of his cooperation agreement involved providing a full account of how the scheme had been planned and executed, which corroborated everything the forensic audit had found. Doug was disbarred by the Texas State Bar in October, pending the outcome of the criminal investigation into his role in the LLC setup. He and Fiona separated in November. I didn't find out about the separation until my aunt mentioned it at Thanksgiving, almost in passing, the way you mention something that everyone already knows but no one wants to say out loud. Fiona was not charged. Kevin's account established that Doug had been the architect of the financial mechanics, and that Fiona had been aware, but had not been a direct participant in the document forgery. Whether that distinction matters legally or morally is something I've thought about more than I'd like to admit. She called me in September. I let it go to voicemail. She said she was sorry. She said she hadn't thought it would go this far. She said she loved me, and I believed her. And I also believed that both of those things could be true at the same time as everything she had done. I haven't called her back. I don't know if I will. I'm still CFO of Caldwell and Horn. We brought in a new operations coordinator in July, a woman named... Well, I'm careful about who I trust now. She's been vetted 6 ways from Sunday, and she comes with references I called personally. We overhauled our document management security protocols. Everything requires dual authorization now. The clipboard logging feature, which had previously been optional, is mandatory across all administrative workstations. It was already there, had been there for years, just turned off by default. Now it's on. My father and I have lunch most Tuesdays. He talks more about the company's early years now, things he never used to mention, stories about my grandfather, how they built the first warehouse in Amarillo with secondhand equipment and a lot of favors from people who believed in them. I think he's working through something. I don't push. I think about the dining table sometimes. The one where Fiona laid out her evidence and my uncle shook his head and I said, "None of that is real," and walked out. I think about how certain everyone in that room was, how clean and finished the story looked from where they were sitting. The thing about a well-constructed lie is that it's built to look like evidence. It has the right shape. It arrives in a folder with printed statements and a memo with your signature on it. And it presents itself calmly, and it counts on the fact that most people, when they see something that looks like proof, will decide that it is. What it can't account for is a log file running quietly in the background of a system that nobody thought to check, keeping its own record. Waiting. I've always believed in documentation. My grandfather kept every receipt, every contract, every handshake deal written down in a ledger. He used to say the numbers don't have opinions, they just are what they are. He was right. They are, and eventually all of them come out. I've thought a lot about what actually brought the whole thing down. Not the attorney, not the courtroom, not even Judge Reeves, as good as she was at reading a room and a document at the same time. What brought it down was a clipboard log that nobody thought to check. A quiet little system running in the background of a server that Kevin had sat 12 feet from for 4 years and never once considered a threat. That's the part I keep coming back to. Not the betrayal, not the forged memo, not the family meeting where my uncle shook his head before I even finished a sentence. The part I keep coming back to is how ordinary the truth was. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't announce itself. It was just a timestamp and the username in a log file sitting there, waiting, completely indifferent to what anyone wanted it to say. I think that's how it usually works. The people who build elaborate schemes against you, the Kevins, the Dougs, the people who are careful and patient and strategic, they spend all their energy on what they can control, the visible stuff, the paper trail that looks right, the documents with the right signatures, the narrative that lands clean when you put it in front of a room full of people who want to believe it. What they don't account for is the thing they forgot was recording, the detail they didn't know existed, the one small administrative error made 2 years ago on a different filing that nobody would ever connect to this, until someone did. I'm not saying I was smarter than them. For 11 days, I was scared and barely sleeping and going through records at midnight trying to understand what had been done to me. Fiona had 3 years of resentment and a brother-in-law who knew how to set up a Delaware LLC. I had my CPA license, my own documentation habits, and the document management system with a clipboard logging feature that had been sitting dormant until my attorney's forensic team turned it on. What I did have, and what I think actually mattered, was the discipline to keep clean records and the restraint not to blow up at that dining room table when I should have. I walked out instead of defending myself in a room that had already decided. That's not a personality trait I was born with. That's something I had to learn. And I learned it the hard way, from watching what happens when people let their emotions run faster than their judgment. Kevin made his mistake because he was in a hurry, or because he was careless, or because he genuinely didn't know the system logged clipboard activity. Dud made his mistake because he reused an email address and assumed no one would ever trace it. Fiona made her mistake the moment she decided that the answer to feeling overlooked was to dismantle someone else instead of building something of her own. None of those things happened because the universe punished them. They happened because bad plans have structural weaknesses and time has a way of finding them. That's not fate. That's just how poorly constructed things eventually fail. What I want anyone to take from this is simple. Do the work the right way, keep your records, and don't mistake someone's silence for ignorance. The people who are the quietest in the room are sometimes the ones who already know exactly what the log file says.